The millionaire's son was covered in painful sores, a skin condition that no treatment could cure. The father watched helplessly as the boy suffered. That's when a simple cleaning lady was hired. One day, the father heard his son screaming in pain from his room. He entered and saw the cleaning lady applying a paste from a strange bottle onto the boy's sores. When he picked up the bottle to read the label, his blood ran cold. There was a skull symbol indicating poison. Without thinking twice, he picked up his son and rushed immediately to the hospital, convinced the woman had poisoned his son. But the revelation the doctor gave him next left him in complete shock. Henry Morrison's empire was a colossus of glass and steel, a fortress built on the pillars of ambition and an unwavering business acumen. His fortune, built through aggressive stock market investments and buying shares in tech companies before the world even knew it needed them, was vast enough to buy small nations. His assets spanned continents, converted into dollars, euros, and even gold stored in Swiss vaults. He was a man who understood the language of numbers, of profit and dividends, a master in the art of turning capital into more capital. Yet, within the walls of his mansion, a palace of cold marble and heavy silences, Henry was a pauper king, ruling over a kingdom of pain. The air smelled not of wealth, but of antiseptic, and the only sound that truly mattered wasn't the ping of stock market alerts, but the muffled weeping that came from the room at the end of the hall. There, his only son, 8-year-old Leo, lived in a prison of his own skin. Red, inflamed sores covered his small body, turning every night into a battlefield against an relentless itch that no amount of money in the world could soothe. Henry blamed himself with the ferocity of an executioner. Ever since his wife, Eleanor, was gone, taken by a sudden and overwhelming illness, he had thrown himself into his work like a drowning man seeking the ocean floor. He had amassed an astronomical net worth. But in his absence, Leo's body had begun to rebel. It was as if grief had found a physical way to manifest itself, and Henry, the billionaire who could move markets with a phone call, was powerless to protect his own child. The mansion had become a private hospital, a sterile sanctuary where hope was disinfected daily. The guardian of this sanctuary was Beatrice, the head nurse, tall, impeccable, with a smile that never reached her eyes. She managed Leo's routine with a glacial efficiency. Her methods were expensive, her treatments imported, and her presence a constant reminder of Henry's failure as a father. Every vial, every ointment, every report sent to specialists in Europe represented more money being spent, but Leo's condition only worsened. Henry's fortune seemed infinite, but his son's health had a price he couldn't pay. That afternoon, the autumn sun cast a golden, melancholic light over the perfectly manicured garden. But inside Henry's office, the air was heavy. He watched a cryptocurrency chart climb on his screen, a recent investment that promised an absurd return, but his heart was empty. It was then that the intercom buzzed. It was the housekeeper informing him that the new cleaning lady had arrived. Henry had completely forgotten. The agency had sent dozens of candidates, but none seemed suitable for the almost surgical environment Beatrice demanded. This one, according to the agency, was different. Simple, discreet, with impeccable references. He instructed her to be sent in without any real interest. However, something made him stand. Perhaps it was the need to escape the office that had become his own cell. He walked down the silent corridor and reached the entrance hall just as the main door opened. Standing there, silhouetted against the afternoon light, was a woman with serene features and hands that seemed to know hard work. Her name was Isabel, and as she entered, she brought with her a scent the mansion hadn't known in years, the aroma of damp earth and fresh leaves. Henry didn't know it, but by allowing that woman and her scent of life to cross his threshold, he had just signed the surrender of his empire of despair, opening the doors to a war he didn't even know he needed to fight. The interior of the mansion was even colder than the exterior suggested. Her simple, comfortable shoes made no sound on the polished marble that stretched out like a frozen lake across the hall. Isabel felt the chilled air on her arms, a stark contrast to the warmth of the sun she had left behind. The smell of disinfectant was so strong it burned the back of her throat, a desperate attempt to purify what couldn't be cleansed with chemicals. The sadness. As the housekeeper guided her through silent corridors, adorned with works of art worth more than any house she had ever known, Isabel wasn't intimidated by the opulence. She saw beyond the assets and the displayed wealth. She saw the absence of life, the hollowness in the enormous spaces, the fine dust of loneliness that no cloth could ever reach. The woman waiting for her in the living room personified the house's atmosphere. Beatrice, the nurse, sized her up with a clinical gaze, her cold blue eyes revealing nothing but a polished professional, rigidly in control. "You're Isabel," she stated, not waiting for confirmation. Her voice was as sterile as her starched white uniform. "I need you to understand that this is not an ordinary house. We have strict protocols. Young Leo's health is the absolute priority. You will use the cleaning products I provide, follow the schedules I set, and under no circumstances will you enter Leo's room without my explicit permission. Any risk of contamination is unacceptable." Every word was a barrier, a line drawn in the sand to make it clear who was in charge. Henry's money bought the best treatments, but it was Beatrice who administered them, and her power in this small universe was absolute. Isabel merely nodded, her calm seeming to subtly irritate the nurse. She was not a woman of many words. She preferred to observe, and she was already observing everything. Her first task was to clean the second-floor hallway, the same one where the boys' room was located. As she worked, polishing a dark wood banister, the door opened for a moment. A small, pale boy peeked out, his large brown eyes filled with a melancholy that didn't belong to a child. Isabel saw the red patches on his neck and the way he distractedly scratched his arm, a habitual gesture of pain. Their gazes met for a second. Isabel offered a small, gentle smile, an instinctive gesture. The boy didn't smile back, but the curiosity in his eyes was a tiny crack of light in the gloom of that hallway. Soon, Beatrice's voice sounded from inside the room, firm and without warmth, and the door closed. Isabel felt a pang in her heart. That child wasn't living in a home, but in a glass bubble, and she suspected the air inside was growing thin. At the end of the afternoon, as she was finishing her work, Isabel saw Beatrice emerge from a small room which looked like a private pharmacy, carrying a stainless steel tray. On it were a syringe, a glass of a milky liquid, and a white porcelain jar. It was Leo's nightly routine. Isabel busied herself, pretending to wipe down a nearby table. But her eyes were fixed on the scene. She noticed how Beatrice handled the items with mechanical precision. The smell emanating from the porcelain jar was strong, chemical, and strangely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Beatrice entered the boy's room, closing the door behind her. A few minutes later, a low, restrained cry began, the sound of a suffering that no longer had the strength to scream. The cry was quickly muffled, as if by a pillow. Isabel remained motionless, the cleaning cloth forgotten in her hand. A cold, unsettling feeling settled in her chest, her intuition telling her that the boy's cries and the strong smell of that ointment were connected in a way that went far beyond a simple treatment. The following days unfolded in a predictable, silent routine. Isabel learned the map of the house, the whims of every floorboard that creaked, and the corners where dust stubbornly settled. But more than that, she learned the rhythm of the boy's pain. In the morning, Leo was a pale, drowsy shadow, moving with the slowness of someone who had fought a battle during the night. He barely touched the breakfast meticulously prepared by Beatrice. In the afternoon, a brief glimpse of childhood seemed to emerge. Isabel would sometimes see him in the sunroom, a sterile, glass-enclosed space, assembling a puzzle with melancholic concentration. In those moments, the redness on his skin seemed a little calmer, and a touch of color rose to his cheeks. It was a fragile peace, a small interlude before the storm. And then came the night. With clockwork precision, Beatrice would appear with her steel tray, and the cycle would begin again. The chemical smell would spread through the hallway, followed by the muffled sound of discomfort that tormented Isabel's heart. One day, while cleaning the corridor leading to Henry's office, the door opened. The multimillionaire walked out, his phone pressed to his ear, his face tense. He didn't see her, lost in his own universe of numbers and strategies. "The cash flow is excellent," he was saying to some invisible party. "The return on those funds has exceeded expectations. We need to discuss diversifying the assets, maybe more investments in treasury bonds to balance the risk." He passed her like a ghost. A man who managed a vast fortune but seemed to have lost the most precious asset within his own home. Isabel felt a wave of compassion for this man who was so powerful and yet so helpless. He trusted Beatrice, paid her a fortune, believing that money could buy a cure, not realizing that the most crucial investment, that of attention and presence, was in default. Later, Isabel was tasked with collecting the trash from the bathrooms. It was the first time she had entered the private bathroom in Leo's suite. The room was immaculate, white and light blue, with fluffy towels and soaps that probably cost her a day's wages. In the small wastebasket, among cotton balls and gauze wrappers, she saw it. It was the small, dark porcelain jar Beatrice used every night. It was empty, driven by an impulse she couldn't control. She picked it up. The label was in German, a succession of long, technical words that meant nothing to her. But the smell! She brought it to her nose and recoiled instinctively. It was a strong, penetrating and caustic odor that didn't resemble any medicine she knew. It smelled like an industrial product, like something that should be kept far away from a child's sensitive skin. Her heart began to beat faster. That was not the smell of healing. It was the smell of aggression. She quickly put the jar back in the trash and finished her work, but her mind was in turmoil. Was it just her imagination, a cleaning lady, with no formal education, questioning an expensive medical treatment prescribed by a qualified professional? It was madness. She could lose her job, a job she desperately needed, but the image of Leo's sad eyes and the smell from that jar refused to leave her mind. At the end of the day, as she walked through the garden toward the back gate, she saw Beatrice near some bushes, away from the house's security cameras, talking on her cell phone. Her voice was low, but the wind carried fragments of her words to Isabel. "Patience. The payment is guaranteed. It always is. Just a little longer." The words floated on the air, devoid of any medical context. What kind of treatment required a guaranteed payment discussed in whispers, hidden in the garden? Isabel's intuition, once a small flame of doubt, now blazed into a 5-alarm fire. Suspicion, once planted, began to grow like a weed in Isabel's mind. Every gesture from Beatrice, every evasive glance, every closed door, now seemed to carry a sinister weight. Isabel became a silent observer, moving through the mansion with the discretion of a shadow, her eyes absorbing details that had previously gone unnoticed. She noticed that Beatrice received deliveries from a specific compounding pharmacy, always in discreet packages, without the logo of well-known laboratories. She also noticed that the nurse often spoke on the phone in a low voice, always moving away if anyone approached. They were conversations about shipments and formulas, terms that sounded more commercial than medical. The woman Henry saw as his son's savior was beginning to look to Isabel like a shrewd dealer whose profits depended directly on the continuation of Leo's illness. One day, Henry had a visit from one of his investment managers. The man, in an expensive suit and with a hurried air, spread charts and spreadsheets across the living room coffee table. Isabel, cleaning the glass doors to the garden, could overhear the conversation. They spoke of compound interest, of stocks on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, of a promising new cryptocurrency that could yield millions. "Your net worth has seen a 7% increase this quarter, Mr. Morrison," the man said with a satisfied smile. "We're talking about a considerable profit, even after accounting for liabilities." Henry listened with a blank expression. He was a billionaire whose wealth multiplied on its own, a self-sustaining financial ecosystem, yet he seemed completely disconnected from that reality. His real treasure, his son, was wasting away just a few feet away, and all the gold in the world seemed incapable of reversing this emotional bankruptcy. That same day, Isabel found her chance. Beatrice had to leave to handle what she called a bureaucratic emergency with the importer of her medicines. The house felt strangely quiet without her controlling presence. The housekeeper was busy in the kitchen, and Leo was asleep, sedated by the supplement Beatrice had given him before she left. With her heart hammering against her ribs, Isabel went to the small private pharmacy. The door, usually locked, was merely ajar. She hesitated for a second, the fear of being caught warring with the urgent need to understand. She pushed the door open. The smell of chemicals was overwhelming. Glass shelves ran from floor to ceiling, filled with boxes, vials, and equipment. Everything was organized with surgical precision. On a steel countertop, she saw what she was looking for, a dark porcelain jar identical to the one she'd found in the trash, but this one was full. Next to it was a syringe and a small, dark glass vial with a dropper. The label on this vial was what intrigued her most. It was handwritten in a thin, almost illegible script. It wasn't the name of a medication. It looked more like a code, a mix of letters and numbers. Driven by the same force that had compelled her before, she opened the porcelain jar. The ointment inside was thick and grayish, and the caustic smell confirmed her suspicions. This was the source of the odor that hung in Leo's room every night. Then she picked up the small, dark vial. She uncapped it and brought the dropper to her nose. It had no smell. It was a clear liquid, almost like water. What could it be? The sleeping supplement. Why wasn't it in proper pharmaceutical packaging? Why a handwritten code instead of a name? She took out her simple cell phone and snapped a photo of the label, the shaky script of the code captured by the lens. Just then, she heard the sound of a car approaching. Beatrice was coming back. Panic seized her. She had to get out of there, but as she turned, her elbow brushed against a stack of empty boxes, which tumbled to the floor with a soft but scandalous thud in the silence of the house. The sound of the falling boxes echoed in the hallway like a gunshot. Isabel's heart raced, a frantic drum in her ears. For a moment, she was paralyzed, fear turning her blood to ice. The front door opened. Beatrice's voice, crisp and cold, reached her. "I forgot my briefcase." Firm, quick footsteps approached on the marble floor. There was no time to fix the boxes, no time to think. Acting on pure instinct, Isabel slipped behind a tall shelf and huddled in the shadow, holding her breath. The pharmacy door swung fully open. Beatrice stopped in the doorway, her body slender and rigid. Her eyes scanned the room and landed immediately on the small mess on the floor. A heavy, tense silence fell. Isabel could feel the nurse's gaze sweeping every corner, every shadow. She could have sworn Beatrice could hear her heart pounding. The seconds dragged on like hours. Beatrice said nothing. She simply walked into the room, straightened the boxes with precise, efficient movements, and then walked to the counter. Her gaze checked the porcelain jar, the syringe, the dark vial. Isabel, hidden, felt a chill. Had she left something out of place? A fingerprint, a millimeter's displacement. Beatrice picked up her briefcase, which was on a chair in the corner, and turned to leave. But before she crossed the threshold, she stopped. She turned her head slowly, her eyes once again sweeping the room like a predator scenting the air. That gaze seemed to pierce the shadows, going straight to Isabel's hiding spot. It was just an instant, a brief moment of hesitation, but for Isabel it was an eternity of terror. Then Beatrice left, closing and locking the door with a decisive click. The sound of the front door closing again was the signal that the immediate danger had passed. Isabel waited another long minute before she dared to move, her legs trembling so badly they could barely hold her. She managed to slip out of the room and back to her work unseen, but the adrenaline was still coursing through her veins. The near miss left her shaken, but also more determined. Beatrice's reaction, the methodical check of the vials, the suspicious glance, was not that of a professional concerned about a little mess. It was the reaction of someone protecting a secret, a valuable secret, a secret that was somehow tied to Henry's fortune, his despair, and Leo's continuous suffering. That night, in her modest home, far from the sterile luxury of the mansion, Isabel couldn't sleep. The image of the coded label on her phone haunted her. She didn't understand chemistry or pharmacology, but she understood people, and she knew, with a certainty that came from the depths of her soul, that Beatrice was not healing Leo. The next morning, Isabel arrived at work with a new resolve. She needed help, someone who could decipher that code. Her niece, Laura, was studying pharmacy at a state university. She was a smart, curious girl. Maybe she could help without asking too many questions. During her lunch break, hidden in the staff break room, Isabel sent the photo to Laura with a simple message. "Can you identify what kind of compound this is? It's for my boss's son. The doctor is from overseas." It was a half-truth, but a necessary one to protect herself and her budding investigation. Laura's reply came almost immediately, and it made Isabel's blood run cold. "Auntie, this isn't a medicine. It's a batch code for an industrial chemical. It's used in some pesticides and solvents. It's an extreme skin irritant. Where did you get this? This can't go anywhere near a child." The text message glowed on her phone screen, a digital indictment. The truth was worse than she had imagined. Beatrice wasn't just being negligent, she was being deliberately malicious. But how could she prove it? Who would believe the cleaning lady over the head nurse with her impeccable credentials and the blind trust of her billionaire employer? Laura's revelation fell on Isabel with the weight of a concrete slab. The horror of the situation was almost paralyzing. It wasn't negligence, it was deliberate cruelty. Every one of Leo's cries, every itchy night, every wound that refused to heal was not a symptom of a mysterious disease, but the result of a calculated act, repeated day after day. Beatrice wasn't keeping her job. She was manufacturing the need for it, fueling a cycle of pain to secure her personal cash flow, a perverse dividend drawn from a child's suffering. The mansion, with all its wealth and financial assets, was the scene of a silent crime, and the capital that financed it came directly from the bank account of Henry Morrison, a father blinded by guilt and misplaced trust. Isabel felt a deep nausea. She had to act. But how? Go to Henry with a text message and such a monstrous accusation? He would fire her on the spot, maybe even accuse her of slander. He trusted Beatrice, the professional who spoke the language of science, of expensive treatments, of the solutions money could supposedly buy. That afternoon, the fragility of her position became painfully clear. As she cleaned the library, a sanctuary of leather and dark wood, Henry came in with Leo. The boy was quiet, his pale face marked by inflammation. Henry sat him in a plush armchair and picked up a large, hardcover book. "Look, son," he said, his voice a little forced, trying to sound cheerful. "This is a book about the stock market. This is where Daddy works. Each of these lines represents companies, businesses. It's how we make money to buy your medicine." Leo stared at the pages full of charts and numbers with empty eyes. He didn't want to know about stocks or net worth. He just wanted the pain to stop. Isabel, watching from the doorway, felt her heart clench. Henry was trying to connect with his son in the only way he knew how, through the language of his fortune, failing to see that what Leo needed wasn't more resources, but protection from the very people he had hired. Isabel's courage came from an unexpected source, her own past. She remembered her grandmother, a countrywoman whose wisdom came not from books, but from the earth. When Isabel was a child and would fall and scrape her knee, her grandmother didn't run for rubbing alcohol. She would go to the yard, pick comfrey and plantain leaves, mash them into a green paste, and apply it to the wound. The earth provides the poison, but it also provides the cure, the old woman would say with a toothless smile. You just have to know how to listen to what it's saying. At that moment, in the cold, sterile mansion, Isabel heard her grandmother's voice. She didn't have scientific proof, she didn't have lab reports, but she had the wisdom of generations in her hands. She had the knowledge of herbs that soothed, that healed, that drew the poison from the skin. And she had the courage born from the desperation of seeing a child suffer unjustly. The decision was made. If the system Henry trusted was failing, she would create her own. If expensive science was poisoning, she would use ancient knowledge to heal. That night, in her small backyard, under the light of the moon, Isabel gathered the herbs, comfrey, calendula, aloe vera, and a specific herb, burdock root, known for its purifying properties. Her hands, accustomed to scrubbing and polishing, now worked with a sacred purpose. She washed, chopped, and macerated the leaves and roots in a stone mortar and pestle that had belonged to her grandmother, mixing them with the medicinal clay she always kept at home. The resulting dark paste had a strong, earthy smell, the scent of life and healing. It was the antithesis of the sterile, chemical odor of Beatrice's ointment. She put the poultice in a small glass jar, a repurposed jelly jar, and drew a simple symbol on the label, a small sun, a sign of hope. The next day, she brought the jar to the mansion, hidden in her bag. The plan was risky, almost insane. She would wait for an opportunity, a moment when she was alone with Leo, and replace the poison with the cure. She didn't know when that chance would come, but she knew that when it did, she would not hesitate. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now smaller than her determination. The silent war for Leo's well-being was about to have its first battle declared. The opportunity came 2 days later, so unexpectedly it felt like a gift from fate. Henry had flown to Europe for an emergency meeting about a high-risk investment involving fluctuations in the euro. Beatrice, taking advantage of her boss's absence, informed the housekeeper she would need the afternoon off for a personal medical appointment, a rare break in her impeccable routine. The house, for the first time since Isabel had started working there, was under relaxed supervision. The housekeeper, an elderly woman who always seemed tired, trusted Isabel and didn't watch over her. The stage was set, Isabel's heartbeat in a steady rhythm of anxiety and purpose. She knew this was the moment. Any hesitation could mean losing the only chance to intervene. She found Leo in his room, sitting on the floor, surrounded by expensive, untouched toys. He was scratching his arm with a painful listlessness, his eyes fixed on some random spot on the wall. The inflammation on his skin was particularly aggressive that day. "Hi, Leo," Isabel said, her voice soft so as not to startle him. "I'm Isabel." The boy looked at her, his large, deep-set eyes showing a cautious curiosity. He had seen her cleaning the hallways, always quiet and discreet. She knelt at a respectful distance. "I know your skin hurts a lot," she continued. "My grandmother used to make a special medicine when I got hurt. It smells a little like the outdoors, but it always worked. Would you let me try?" She pulled her small glass jar from her bag. The hand-drawn sun seemed to glow in the room's artificial light. Leo looked from the jar to Isabel's face. He didn't see Beatrice's cold authority, but a genuine kindness, a warmth he could barely remember feeling. Slowly, he held out his arm, a gesture of trust that made Isabel's heart swell with a painful tenderness. With her hands protected by gloves she had brought for this very moment, she opened the jar. The smell of earth and herbs filled the sterile air of the room. Carefully, she took a small amount of the dark paste and began to apply it to the most inflamed skin on Leo's arm. The boy flinched at the first touch. "It stings a little at first, sweetie," Isabel whispered, her voice firm and calming. "That's the herb pulling the bad stuff out. It'll pass soon." Leo, though scared, seemed to understand. He stayed still, his face contorted in a grimace of discomfort, but he didn't cry. He trusted her. Isabel continued her work, covering the worst of the sores with the natural poultice. She worked with concentration, the outside world fading away, leaving only her, the boy, and this act of faith and rebellion. And that's when the world caved in. The sound of the bedroom door being thrown open made her jump. Standing in the doorway, his face a mask of fury and panic, was Henry Morrison. His trip had been cancelled at the last minute. He had come home early, looking for his son. As he passed the hallway, he heard Leo's low whimper as the initial sting of the paste made itself felt. He ran to the room, and the scene he found confirmed his worst fears. The cleaning lady, a stranger, kneeling beside his vulnerable child, applying a dark, suspicious-looking substance from a jar with a label that, to his terrified eyes distorted by panic, looked like a black magic symbol, a skull. The boy's cry of pain, however brief, was all the proof he needed. Blinded by protective instinct, he didn't see care, only aggression. "What are you doing?" he roared, his voice echoing through the room. Before Isabel could say a word, he lunged forward, violently snatched the jar from her hand, and swept his son into his arms. "You've poisoned him!" he screamed, his face pale with horror. "Driver! Get us to the hospital now!" He ran out of the room with a frightened Leo in his arms, leaving Isabel kneeling on the floor, her heart in ruins, the herbal paste on her gloves looking like irrefutable proof of a crime she did not commit. Isabel's world fell apart in an instant. Henry's accusations, heavy with panic and fury, ricocheted off the walls of the luxurious bedroom, leaving a deafening silence in their wake. She remained kneeling, the glass jar shattered on the carpet beside her, the dark paste staining the expensive fibers like an open wound. The scent of earth and herbs, which had once represented hope, now seemed like the odor of her own ruin. The housekeeper and other staff, drawn by the shouts, appeared at the door, their faces a mixture of curiosity and alarm. In their eyes, Isabel saw her own reflection, no longer the discreet cleaning lady, but an intruder, a threat, perhaps a criminal. The presumption of guilt was a toxic fog that filled the air. No one asked her a single question. The verdict had already been delivered by the master of the house, the billionaire whose word was law within these walls. She stood with difficulty, her legs still trembling. The housekeeper, with a hard expression Isabel had never seen before, told her to wait in the entrance hall, her voice devoid of any sympathy. Mr. Morrison called. "The police are on their way." The word police fell on her like a death sentence. All she had done was out of compassion, a desperate act to alleviate a child's suffering. And now she was being accused of poisoning. Sitting on the edge of a velvet armchair, under the watchful eye of a security guard who had appeared as if by magic, Isabel felt the weight of Henry Morrison's empire crush her. He had the power, the fortune, the best lawyer's money could buy. And her. She had a broken clay pot and her grandmother's wisdom, assets that held no value on the stock exchange of the rich man's justice. Meanwhile, in the emergency room of one of the city's most expensive hospitals, Henry paced like a caged animal. Leo was in an exam room, surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses. Henry's panic had morphed into a cold, sharp rage. He had given the broken jar, carefully collected from the floor, to the chief physician, demanding a full toxicology report. "She poisoned him," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "That woman, I hired her to clean my house, and she tried to hurt my son." The attending physician, an older man named Dr. Evans with tired eyes that had seen it all, listened with professional calm. He examined Leo's arm, where the herbal paste was beginning to dry. The surrounding skin, though still red, looked less swollen, less irritated than the other areas of the boy's body. "Mr. Morrison, I need you to calm down," the doctor said, his voice serene. The initial stinging the boy felt is common with many topical preparations, even some pharmaceutical ointments. It is not necessarily a sign of poisoning. But Henry wasn't listening. He was blinded by the narrative his terrified mind had created, the narrative that he had, once again, failed to protect his son. He had allowed a threat into his home, under his roof. The guilt that gnawed at him from the inside now had a face, the calm, serene face of Isabel, and he would make her pay. He picked up the phone and called his lead attorney, a man known for his aggression and for never losing a case. "I want you to destroy her," Henry said, his voice low and lethal. "I want her to regret the day she was born. Use every resource, all my capital, if necessary. I don't care about the cost." The war, once silent and waged in the corridors of his mansion, was now public and brutal, and Henry Morrison was about to use the full power of his fortune to annihilate the only person who had dared to challenge the darkness that had settled in his home. The arrival of the police was a sober, efficient affair, devoid of the drama Isabel had imagined. Two officers, a man and a woman, listened to the housekeepers' and security guards' version of events, jotting everything down in their notepads with impassive expressions. They treated her with a professional courtesy that was somehow more terrifying than open aggression. She was a person of interest, a piece in a puzzle that had barely begun to be assembled. Isabel answered their questions in a low but firm voice, telling her side of the story, her suspicion, Beatrice's ointment, her grandmother's recipe. She saw the disbelief in their eyes. The story sounded fanciful, the excuse of a woman caught red-handed. "And where is this nurse, Miss Beatrice?" the female officer asked. The housekeeper, when questioned, reported that Beatrice was not answering her phone. Her whereabouts were, for the moment, unknown. In the hospital waiting room, time crawled. Henry, after the call to his lawyer, felt hollowed out, the rage giving way to a deep, icy fear. He watched his son through a glass window. Leo was calmer now, and Dr. Evans was by his side, speaking to him gently. The doctor left the exam room and walked toward Henry, holding a clipboard. The preliminary blood tests show no sign of any systemic toxin or poison. "Mr. Morrison, his heart rate is normal. So is his blood pressure. He's stable." Henry looked at the doctor, confusion beginning to pierce the armor of his certainty. "But the scream, the dark paste. I took a look at the substance you brought in," Dr. Evans continued, gesturing to the evidence bag on the table. "The lab will take a few hours for a full analysis, but from my experience, this looks like an herbal poultice, a folk remedy. The base appears to be clay, and I recognize the scent of calendula and comfrey. They're plants with anti-inflammatory and healing properties. The sting your son felt may have been from the burdock root, which is a strong, purifying agent. In fact," the doctor paused, looking directly into Henry's eyes, "the inflammation on his arm, it's visibly subsiding. The redness is calmer than on the rest of his body." The doctor's words fell on Henry like stones. He moved closer to the glass, his heart hammering. He looked closely at Leo's arm, the very arm where he had seen Isabel applying the paste. And it was true. The skin there, though stained with dried clay, looked calmer, less angry than the skin on the other arm, which still bore the familiar red, furious sores. A terrible doubt, a seed of uncertainty, began to sprout in his mind. What if he was wrong? What if, in his blind panic, he had condemned the only person who had actually tried to help? The image of Isabel's calm face, her eyes filled not with malice but with genuine concern, assaulted his memory. The memory of his own shout, "You've poisoned him," echoed in his head, but now it sounded hysterical, accusatory, and perhaps terribly unjust. It was then that his cell phone rang. It was his head of security. "Mr. Morrison, we have a problem. The nurse, Beatrice, she never went home. We checked the street cameras. She left this afternoon, as she said, but she didn't go to a doctor's appointment. She went straight to the international airport. She boarded a one-way flight to Zurich." Each word was a hammer blow, demolishing the framework of his reality. Beatrice had fled. Why? Why would a dedicated nurse concerned for her patient flee the country? Unless she had something to hide. The seed of doubt in his mind exploded into a terrible epiphany. The cleaning lady, the grandmother's remedy, the nurse's flight. The puzzle pieces began to click into place, not to form a picture of a crime committed by Isabel, but of a far deeper and more sinister conspiracy in which he, the great businessman, the master of investment and strategy, had been the blindest, most naive pawn of all. The shock of the revelation left Henry breathless. Beatrice on a one-way flight to Zurich. The information was so incongruous, so out of character for the dedicated nurse he had constructed in his mind, that for a moment his brain refused to process it. He hung up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. The hospital's aseptic hum seemed to recede, replaced by a loud ringing in his ears. Her flight made no sense, unless the cleaning lady's wild accusations weren't wild at all. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He looked again at his son, at the visibly calmer skin on the arm Isabel had treated, and the terrible truth began to crystallize, sharp and monstrous in its clarity. He hadn't just been deceived, he had been complicit. All his money, all his fortune invested in cutting-edge treatments, had been nothing more than working capital for the torture of his own son. "Dr. Evans," Henry said, his voice hoarse, turning to the physician. "I need a favor, an urgent one." He quickly explained the situation, the suspicion that now consumed him. "The ointment this nurse applied every night. It's at my house. I need it analyzed. And the supplement she gave him to sleep. Everything. I need to know what's in those jars." Dr. Evans, seeing the anguish and sincerity on Henry's face, acted quickly. He made a call to the hospital's lab chief, explaining the urgency of the situation. Henry, in turn, called his head of security. "Go to my house, now. Go to the small pharmacy on the second floor. Get the dark porcelain jar and the glass vial with the dropper. Bring everything to the hospital immediately. And don't let anyone else touch anything." As the machinery of his vast wealth and power began to turn in the right direction, a feeling of overwhelming shame washed over him. He thought of Isabel. He thought of how he had torn her away from his son, how he had accused her, how he had set the police on her. He, the billionaire who prided himself on his ability to read people and situations in the business world, had been duped in the most fundamental way. He had trusted the white uniform and the technical jargon, and had dismissed the quiet wisdom and the calloused hands. The image of her, kneeling on the floor, her expression shocked and wounded, burned in his mind. He picked up the phone again and called his attorney. "Call it off," he said, his voice firm but laden with remorse. "Drop all the charges against the cleaning lady. Her name is Isabel. Drop them now and find out where she is. I need to speak with her." The wait for the lab results was the longest of Henry's life. He didn't leave his son's side. He took Leo's small hand, feeling the warm skin, and for the first time in years, he felt not revulsion at the illness, but a wave of protective love so fierce it made him dizzy. He had kept his distance, delegating the care, the affection, to a paid stranger. He had tried to solve the problem with his net worth, writing checks, believing that the profits from his investments could somehow translate into well-being. Now, he saw the bankruptcy of his approach. While the interest on his investments grew, his family's emotional liabilities had compounded, bringing them to the brink of ruin. Finally, Dr. Evans returned, his face grim. In his hands, he held 2 sheets of paper. "We have the results," he said, his voice low. Henry held his breath. The world he knew was about to end, and a new one, built on shame and redemption, was about to begin. "The ointment," Dr. Evans began, his tone professional but with an underlying note of disbelief, "contains no recognizable medicinal compounds. On the contrary, the main active ingredient is an industrial tar derivative, a potent contact irritant. In small, repeated doses, it causes the exact type of chronic dermatitis your son presents: redness, inflammation, intense itching, and non-healing lesions." Henry felt the floor vanish from under his feet. He leaned against the wall, the air rushing from his lungs. Industrial tar. The words echoed in his mind, grotesque and violent. Beatrice hadn't been treating the wounds. She had been creating them, every single day, with a sterile smile and a steady hand. "And the sleeping supplement?" he managed to ask, his voice a mere whisper. "It was a common sedative, but at a dose slightly above what's recommended for a child of his age and weight, enough to keep him drowsy and listless, less likely to complain or fight the application of the ointment. It was a system, a terribly effective one." The doctor continued to speak, explaining the technical details, but Henry barely heard him. His mind was playing a horror film in slow motion, Beatrice applying the poison night after night, while he, in the next office, traded stocks, bought crypto, grew his fortune, completely oblivious to the fact that his money was funding the systematic torture of his only son. Guilt was a monster with sharp claws, tearing him apart from the inside, not with the dull ache of before, but with a sharp, unforgivable agony. He didn't collapse from grief, but from a shame so profound it burned like acid. He had accused the savior and trusted the aggressor. He had placed all his faith in credentials and appearances, ignoring the intuition and the truth that were right in front of his eyes. His lawyer called back, "Miss Isabel has been released. Mr. Morrison, the charges have been dropped. She's at home. I tried to offer her compensation on your behalf, but she refused. She said she didn't want your money." The refusal was another blow. She didn't want his fortune, his assets, the solution he used for everything. And why would she? His money had been part of the problem, the fuel that fed Beatrice's charade. He needed to see her. He needed to apologize, though he knew the word was inadequate for the magnitude of his error. He left Leo in the care of Dr. Evans, who had already begun the correct treatment, a simple cortisone cream to calm the acute inflammation, and drove himself home. The mansion, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a mausoleum, a monument to his colossal failure as a father. The drive to Isabel's house, in a modest neighborhood on the other side of town, was a pilgrimage of penance. The streets grew narrower, the houses smaller, but the yards were full of life, the windows open to the afternoon breeze. It was a world of a different kind of wealth, one he didn't understand. He pulled up in front of a small blue house with an iron gate and a yard full of potted herbs. The smell of soil and basil was in the air. He hesitated for a long moment, his hand hovering over the doorbell. What would he say? How could he even begin to repair the damage he had caused? He, Henry Morrison, the billionaire accustomed to multi-million-dollar negotiations, had never felt so small, so utterly without resources. Finally, with the humility of a man who had lost everything that mattered, he rang the bell. The door opened, and there she was. Her eyes, which had once looked at him with respectful calm, now regarded him with a deep sadness and an unshakable dignity. The silence between them was an abyss, and Henry knew he would need more than words to cross it. The moment of greatest tension was not a confrontation of shouts or accusations, but a deep, heavy silence that settled in Isabel's small living room. The room was simple but welcoming. An old couch covered with a crocheted blanket, picture frames with smiling faces on a bookshelf, and the smell of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen. It was a home, a place of genuine affection, and its warm atmosphere only accentuated the coldness and emptiness of Henry's life. He remained standing, feeling like a clumsy, out-of-place giant. Isabel watched him, not with anger, but with a reservation that was more impenetrable than any wall. She didn't invite him to sit. That silence was her judgment, and Henry knew he had to be the first to speak, to expose himself, to confess his failure. He began, his voice cracking, something that never happened in his board meetings. He cleared his throat, forcing the words out. I don't know how to start. There's no excuse for what I did, for what I said. I was blind by fear, by guilt, and I made you the target of all of it. He looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of absolution, but found only an expectant calm. I was wrong, terribly wrong. About everything, about you, about Beatrice, about how to take care of my own son. The confession came out raw, stripped of all pride. It was the declaration of bankruptcy from a man with a net worth in the billions, but whose emotional capital was zero. Your son was suffering, Isabel finally said, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. I saw it every day. I heard him cry every night. I didn't act to defy you, Mr. Morrison. I acted because a child was in pain, and the person who was supposed to be protecting him was hurting him. Every word was the unvarnished truth, and each one was a knife in Henry's heart. He didn't challenge her, didn't try to justify himself. He just nodded, accepting the blow. I know, he whispered, and instead of seeing your act of courage, I saw a threat. I treated you like a criminal, the only person who had the bravery to do what was right. He took a step forward, his hands open in a gesture of supplication. I came here to beg for your forgiveness, Isabel, though I know I don't deserve it, and to ask you for something I have even less right to ask. He paused, gathering what courage he had left. Leo needs you. I don't know how to take care of him. I've failed. All my money, all my specialists, they failed. You were the only one who saw the truth. I'm asking you, please come back, not as a cleaning lady, as Leo's caregiver, as the person who will heal him. I will pay you whatever you want, any amount. Name your price. Isabel looked at him for a long time, her gaze seeming to search his soul. She saw the desperation, the shame, the genuine remorse, and for the first time, she saw the father behind the billionaire, a lost, broken father, desperate to fix his mistake. I don't want your money, Mr. Morrison, she said, her voice a little softer. The money is what caused all this. What Leo needs can't be bought. He needs care, real care, and he needs his father. The tension peaked. Her answer was neither a yes nor a no. It was a condition, a demand for a transformation that went far beyond a work contract. She wasn't negotiating a salary. She was demanding the surrender of Henry's heart. The question that hung in the air was whether he, the man who built an empire on control and financial power, could let it all go to relearn how to be just a father. Henry understood the condition implicit in Isabel's words. It wasn't a negotiation over assets. It was about surrender and presence. He, who had spent his life accumulating, now had to learn how to give of himself. I know, he replied, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. I know I failed him, but I'm willing to learn. If you'll teach me, please, Isabel, help me bring my son back. In that plea, there was not the tone of an employer giving an order, but the supplication of a broken man. Isabel's dignity did not waver, but her heart, which had always been guided by compassion, opened. She saw the truth in those desperate eyes. She saw the chance not just to heal a child, but to rebuild a family. "I will come back," she said. Finally, for Leo, Isabel's return to the mansion was transformative. The smell of disinfectant was gradually replaced by the aroma of herbal teas and the clay poultice she applied daily to Leo's skin. Under her care, the boy's healing was remarkably fast. Without the daily chemical aggressor, Leo's skin began to regenerate. The sores closed, the redness subsided, and within days, the incessant itching faded into a distant memory. But the deepest healing was not of the skin, but of the spirit. Isabel didn't just tend to Leo's physical wounds, she nurtured his long-neglected childhood soul. She read him stories, taught him about the plants in her small garden, which she started in pots on his bedroom balcony, and most importantly, she made him laugh. The sound of Leo's laugh, clear and genuine, echoed through the mansion's silent halls for the first time in years, and it was the most valuable music Henry had ever heard. True to his promise, Henry became Isabel's student. He cancelled meetings, delegated investment decisions, and made a point of being present. He would sit beside Isabel as she cared for Leo, learning how to mix the herbs, how to apply the paste gently, how to talk to his son about things that didn't involve business or money. At first, he was clumsy, his large hands, accustomed to signing contracts, seeming ill-suited for the delicate task. But he persisted. He learned how to bathe his son, how to read his favorite stories with funny voices, how to simply be there, sitting on the floor, putting together a puzzle. Slowly, the chasm between father and son began to be filled, not with dollars or euros, but with time, attention, and affection. The inheritance he was truly building for Leo was now made of memories and a rediscovered love. Meanwhile, justice ran its course. With the cooperation of Swiss authorities, Beatrice was located and extradited. The investigation revealed she had done the same to other wealthy families in the past, a cruel scheme to guarantee a long-term and highly lucrative position. She was convicted, and her story arc ended behind bars, a cold and just resolution for the pain she had caused. But back at the mansion, no one thought of her anymore. They were too busy building a new future. Henry, watching Isabel and Leo together, laughing under the afternoon sun in the garden, felt something new blossom in his ravaged heart. The gratitude he felt for her transformed into a deep admiration for her strength, her wisdom, and her unwavering kindness. And that admiration, as the days went by, deepened into a serene and powerful love, a love that had nothing to do with his net worth or status, but with the essence of who she was. The woman who, with the courage of her convictions and the wisdom of her hands, had healed his family's wounds, inside and out. A year passed. Henry Morrison's mansion was no longer an empire of silence and disinfectant, but a kingdom of life and the scent of apple crumb cake. The expensive art still hung on the walls, but now it shared space with colorful children's drawings taped up with abandon. The garden, once a perfectly pruned and untouched landscape, now had a small vegetable patch tended by Isabel and Leo, and the lawn bore the marks of a soccer ball. The greatest transformation, however, was not in the house, but in the man. Henry learned to leave the stock market charts for the end of the day. His top priority was getting home in time to hear about the bug Leo found, or the new leaf that had sprouted on the basil plant. He discovered that the dividends from his son's smile were infinitely more valuable than those from any stock. His former life, a relentless hunt for more wealth, more capital, now seemed like the story of a stranger. He understood that true fortune was not in vaults or financial instruments, but in those simple, irreplaceable moments. Leo's healing was complete. His skin, once a map of pain, was now smooth and healthy. He was a vibrant, curious boy, free from the prison of his own body. But the most miraculous healing was Henry's. He had learned to trust again, not in spreadsheets and projections, but in intuition and the heart. And his heart, which he thought was in ruins, had been patiently rebuilt by Isabel. The love between them grew naturally and serenely, like one of her plants. It wasn't an overwhelming passion, but a deep feeling based on mutual respect, admiration, and a gratitude that had transformed into a solid foundation for the future. Isabel didn't change who she was. She remained the simple woman with steady hands and a wise heart who saw the world through a lens of kindness and pragmatism. She taught him to see the wealth that money can't buy. One Sunday afternoon, as Leo ran through the garden chasing butterflies, Henry approached Isabel, who was sitting on the porch bench. He didn't carry expensive flowers or a lavish jewel. In his hand was only a small wooden box that he had sanded and varnished himself. He sat beside her, his heart pounding with an anxiety he didn't feel even when closing the biggest deals of his life. "Isabel," he began, his voice calm, "I spent most of my life making investments, buying and selling, always looking for the highest return. But the best investment I ever made wasn't in gold or crypto. It was the day I decided to trust you. The return has been my own life, my son's life." He opened the small box. Inside, there was no diamond ring, but 2 simple wedding bands, made of recycled gold. "I don't want to offer you my net worth or my assets. I want to offer you my future. I want to build a family with you, based on what truly matters. Will you marry me?" Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but a smile lit up her face. "Yes," she said, her voice soft, "I will." At that moment, under the afternoon sun, the family that had been healed from the inside out sealed their destiny, proving that love, courage, and the wisdom of the earth are the only truly unshakable assets.